On the day of his college graduation, after a self-destructive confession to the man he had secretly loved for 4 years, Leo Vance vanished from Ethan Sinclair's world. 3 years later, they met again when Leo's father brought Ethan to their home to select a spouse for a strategic alliance. That one, Ethan Sinclair said, his voice a low murmur that cut through the stifling silence. His gaze, cool and appraising, settled on Leo, who sat frozen in his wheelchair. It should have been Leo's father presenting his children with deference. After all, his family was the one in dire need. Yet, the Sinclair Corporation had inexplicably agreed to his father's sycophantic suggestion that Ethan come and choose in person. And so, on this morning of the year's first snow, Leo's stepbrother, Owen, was sequestered in his walk-in closet, meticulously selecting an outfit. His stepsister, Ashley, was in her own vanity room, applying a flawless mask of makeup. Leo, meanwhile, felt like a piece of forgotten furniture. He listlessly wheeled himself to the window, watching the flakes drift down. As his siblings hurried past, they shot him looks of thinly veiled annoyance, their expressions making it clear he was an obstruction. The heir to the Sinclair Corporation was coming, and his presence was an inconvenience. About 6 months ago, his father's business had begun a precipitous decline. Despite frantic efforts, the company teetered on the brink of collapse. It was then, through a web of connections, that he had managed to secure a line to the Sinclairs. But the connection was useless. The Sinclairs wanted for nothing, and the Vance family had no leverage, no long-standing relationship to exploit. In a final, desperate gamble, his father had proposed a union. To everyone's astonishment, they had accepted. He had overheard his father on the phone in his study, his voice strained with false confidence, wondering aloud which of his children Mr. Sinclair might favor. He even extended a casual invitation for Ethan to visit for a simple meal before deciding, a hollow pleasantry no one expected to be taken seriously. Yet Ethan Sinclair had agreed. Ashley, her makeup meticulously applied, called out toward the walk-in closet where her brother was still deliberating. She reminded Owen that their guest of honor might not even be interested in men, her tone dripping with amusement. Owen, unbothered, continued to hold up suits against his frame, retorting that one could never be too sure. They shared a dismissive laugh before their eyes landed on Leo. Ashley suggested it would be best if he just stayed out of sight. Leo turned his gaze from the snow-dusted lawn and agreed. He hadn't been in his room for long before a commotion erupted from downstairs. The Sinclairs had arrived. The noise soon subsided into a tense quiet. Leo couldn't hear their conversation through the closed door. A few moments later, Maria, the housekeeper who had come with his mother years ago, entered with a small plate of strawberries. She had stayed on after his mother's death, unwilling to leave him alone. He thanked her, taking a strawberry and asking if they had all arrived. Maria nodded, her expression grim. She described the young Mr. Sinclair as a formidable presence who had spoken only a few words upon entering, his demeanor cold and unapproachable. She thought it was for the best that Leo wasn't out there. Leo just shook his head, murmuring that in his condition, it was probably for the best. Maria interrupted him firmly, insisting that he was wonderful and that his legs would heal. He didn't have the heart to argue, so he simply agreed that they would. They were discussing what soup she might make for him that evening when Ashley pushed the door open without knocking. Her face was tight with displeasure as she announced that their father wanted him in the living room. Leo and Maria exchanged a bewildered look before she wiped his hands and began to push his chair toward the sound of voices. As they neared the living room, he heard his father's voice, stripped of all its usual authority and filled with a humility that was foreign to Leo's ears. He was apologizing profusely, explaining that his other son was indisposed due to a leg injury and he hadn't wanted to spoil Mr. Sinclair's visit. They entered the room just as Leo was about to call out a greeting. But the words died in his throat. Seated in the primary armchair, a slight frown creasing his brow as he looked directly at Leo, was Ethan Sinclair, the man he hadn't seen in 3.5 years. His father rushed over, taking the wheelchair from Maria. "Leo," he urged, "come say hello to Mr. Sinclair." He was pushed into the center of the room, closer to Ethan, but he couldn't speak. He had never imagined seeing Ethan again. His heart hammered against his ribs, a wild and erratic rhythm. It felt as if something was lodged in his throat. It was then that Ethan, lounging back in the armchair, lifted his chin slightly in Leo's direction. "That one," he repeated. A profound silence fell over the room, broken only by the crackle of the fireplace. Nearly 2 full minutes passed before Leo's father, his voice trembling, sought clarification, asking if Mr. Sinclair was referring to Leo. Ethan's expression remained unchanged, a mask of cool detachment, as if they were complete strangers. "Yes," he confirmed. "He leaves with me now." No one gave Leo a chance to process. He wasn't even allowed a moment to say goodbye to Maria. Ethan's assistant was already there, wheeling him out to the waiting car, leaving a room full of stunned faces behind. His only luggage was the battered, paint-chipped wheelchair. Outside, the snow was falling more heavily. In the car, Ethan sat beside him with his eyes closed, not uttering a single word. He hadn't spoken to Leo, hadn't even met his gaze, since making his choice. Leo stared out at the blurring white landscape, wondering if Ethan's selection was born from some strange, unknowable predilection. When they arrived at the Sinclair residence, the assistant settled him in a second-floor room and then departed. The vast house was unnervingly quiet, as if he and Ethan were the only 2 people in a museum after hours. Leo decided he had to try to speak. He cleared his throat, but once he had Ethan's attention, he didn't know what to say. Thankfully, Ethan spoke first, informing him that he had some work to finish and that Leo should rest. He gestured to an adjacent bedroom, adding that dinner would be brought up later. Then he went downstairs and left the house. Leo stared into the cavernous space, deciding it was best to do as he was told. It was after dinner when Ethan finally returned. A polite housekeeper had served him both lunch and dinner in his room. He found Leo idly flipping through channels on the television. Ethan announced it was time for him to get cleaned up. Without waiting for a reply, he began pushing Leo's chair toward the ensuite bathroom. Leo quickly tried to stop him, insisting he could manage on his own. All he needed was a change of clothes. But Ethan didn't listen, wheeling him directly into the bathroom. He knelt in front of the chair and his hands went to the buttons of Leo's shirt. "No, really," Leo protested, pushing at Ethan's hands. "It's too much trouble. I can do it myself." This time, Ethan stopped. He remained crouched before him, his gaze finally meeting Leo's for the first time that day. He asked, with unnerving sincerity, why he wouldn't let him help. Leo felt a flush of heat rise in his neck, explaining that it would be a great inconvenience. Ethan countered that he didn't find it inconvenient. "But still," Leo faltered. "Still what?" Ethan's eyes were intense, demanding an answer. You know, Leo finally mumbled, feeling cornered. "It's not convenient." The man before him was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes searching Leo's. "I don't know," Ethan said, his voice low and deliberate, each word landing with weight. 3 years ago, on my graduation day, a man ran up to me, kissed me while he was crying, and then ran away. I never found him again. I don't know what he meant by it. For 3 years, I've wondered if he liked me, or if it was just some kind of graduation prank. Can you tell me? Leo was stunned that he would ask. Stunned that he had known all along it was him. In college, they had been in different departments, their connection amounting to little more than nodding acquaintances. On the night of graduation, Leo had waited for him, hidden in the shadows of the trees, and impulsively kissed him. It wasn't a confession so much as a final, desperate punctuation mark on 4 years of silent adoration. He remembered the sky was overcast that night, the moon obscured by clouds. He had thought with a pang of sorrow that he would never see him again. How wrong he had been. After a moment of shock, he schooled his features into a neutral mask. He told Ethan he would have to ask the person himself, as he couldn't guess at another's intentions. Ethan seemed taken aback by the detached response. For a moment, a flicker of something dark, like disappointment, crossed his face. "You're right," he said softly. "I shouldn't have asked you." Then, his hands returned to Leo's shirt buttons. Leo tried to push him away again, but this time Ethan gently brushed his hands aside. "I brought you here. Helping you is my responsibility. Isn't it?" His words left Leo's hands suspended in midair. In that moment of hesitation, Ethan swiftly unbuttoned his shirt and then, lifting him slightly, slid his pants down. The bathroom was silent. Leo instinctively hunched over, trying to cover himself, but he saw Ethan's gaze fixated on the 2 long, jagged scars that marred his thighs. He remained kneeling, staring at them for a long time. Then he slowly reached out, his fingers tracing the ugly, puckered skin with a touch so gentle it was as if he feared causing pain. But there was no pain left there to feel. "How?" Ethan asked, his voice soft as he looked up into Leo's eyes. "An accident," Leo replied, looking away. "When?" "A year ago." Ethan paused, then said 3 words that caught Leo completely off guard. "That was hard." Leo turned back in surprise. Since the accident, besides Maria, no one had ever said anything like that to him. He stared at Ethan, speechless, until Ethan reached up and gently wiped something from the corner of his eye. Then, to his utter astonishment, Ethan leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to his forehead. Soon, the sound of running water filled the room. The warm spray on his skin mingled with the heat from Ethan's hands, a current of warmth spreading through him. After, Ethan carried him to his bedroom, and laid him on the bed. After his own shower, he lay down beside him. During his years of pining for Ethan, Leo had never entertained fantasies of them being together, except for the occasional dream of sharing a bed like this. But dreams were fragmented and lacked the tangible warmth of the real man now lying next to him. The familiar flutter in his chest, dormant for 3 years, returned with a vengeance. "Tomorrow we're going to see a doctor," Ethan said, breaking the silence. He reached over and took Leo's hand. Leo flinched, a small, involuntary attempt to pull away, but Ethan's grip was firm. "What doctor?" "A specialist I've flown in from Germany. We're going to see about your legs. See if there are any viable treatment options." The words sent a thrill of hope through him, a feeling he hadn't dared to entertain for a very long time. In the year he had been in the wheelchair, he had longed to stand again, but each flicker of hope had been extinguished by disappointment. As if sensing his turmoil, Ethan squeezed his hand tighter. "Don't be afraid," he said with conviction. "I won't let you be disappointed." Leo couldn't help but turn his head. Ethan was watching him, his expression one of absolute focus and resolve. The next morning, a brand new, exquisitely crafted wheelchair sat by the bed. It was a marvel of engineering, sleek and expensive. Ethan offered no explanation for when he had acquired it. He simply lifted Leo and settled him into the seat. It was perfectly comfortable, as if it had been custom-made. For the first time in over a year, Leo was free from the second-hand chair his father had bought him, the one with the chipping paint and the sticky wheels. Ethan pushed him into a large consultation room at the hospital. Several doctors conversed quietly in German. Leo couldn't understand their words, but he could read the intense seriousness on their faces. With every passing second, the fragile hope inside him began to shrink. "Don't be afraid," Ethan whispered, his hand finding Leo's again. "I told you, I won't let you be disappointed." Leo managed a weak nod. After what felt like an eternity, one of the doctors finally looked at them and spoke 2 words in heavily accented English. "It's possible." The rest of the conversation faded into a blur. He watched Ethan engage in a detailed discussion with them, saw their eyes occasionally flick toward him, but the only words echoing in his mind, like thunder, were "it's possible." They decided that the treatment would begin after the new year, in 2 months' time. Ethan told him he was to rest and regain his strength. A few days later, as Ethan was putting on his suit jacket, he paused and turned to Leo, who was still in bed. He suggested that Leo come with him to the office. Leo hesitated, then declined, explaining that he would be fine alone. He understood Ethan's unspoken concern and reassured him that after surviving the past year, he wasn't about to give up now. A shadow of regret crossed Ethan's face. He simply told Leo to call if he needed anything. As Leo watched him finish dressing, he was struck by the strange feeling that he had seen this exact scene before, perhaps in a long-forgotten dream. For the next week, Leo stayed at the house. The housekeeper and butler were impeccably polite, consulting him on every meal. The days passed quietly until the winter solstice arrived with a pre-dawn snowfall. That afternoon, as Leo was listlessly reading a book, Ethan called. He asked if Leo was busy. When Leo said no, Ethan asked if he could find a suit in his closet and have it brought to the office. Leo immediately put down his book and agreed. Ethan said any formal suit would do and that he would send the driver. After a careful selection process with the housekeeper's help, Leo was on his way. The landscaped medians along the highway were already blanketed in white. When they arrived at the Sinclair Corporation Tower, Leo called Ethan, expecting him to send an assistant down. Instead, Ethan told him to come straight up. The line went dead before Leo could protest. Left with no choice, he had the driver push him inside, the wrapped suit resting on his lap. He was still trying to figure out what to say to the receptionist when the elevator doors opened to the executive floor. Ethan was waiting there. He took the wheelchair from the driver without a word and began pushing Leo into the office space. After graduation, Leo had worked in small design studios for a couple of years, but he had never set foot in a corporate headquarters of this scale. He had expected a hushed, solemn atmosphere, but the office was buzzing with energy. Employees looked cheerful and excited. Ethan explained that for the solstice, the company cafeteria was serving a special holiday lunch. He insisted Leo join them. Leo's first instinct was to refuse, not wanting to be the cause of gossip, but Ethan was firm. He praised the skill of the company's chefs and said they should eat together. Leo couldn't argue further. After a short wait in Ethan's expansive office, he was wheeled into the bustling cafeteria. The room was crowded. As Ethan entered, people called out greetings, which he returned warmly. Then, a cheerful-looking man, the type who was always the class clown, called out loudly to Ethan. He said everyone was dying to know who the person he was pushing was. Once the question was out, the dam of professional decorum broke, and a wave of curious inquiries followed. Standing behind the wheelchair, Ethan was out of Leo's line of sight, but Leo could hear the smile in his voice when he spoke. "Someone I'm pursuing." A collective gasp went through the cafeteria. Leo whipped his head around to look up at him. Ethan was looking down, his expression surprisingly tender. Just then, a man strode in from the entrance and came directly to their side. "Well, if it isn't Leo Vance," he said. Leo looked up and recognized Chris, Ethan's best friend from college. He managed a polite hello, remarking that he never expected to see him here. Chris laughed, replying that while Leo might not have expected it, he certainly had. Leo didn't understand what he meant. Without another word, Chris nudged Ethan aside and took over the wheelchair. He chattered away as he pushed Leo toward a table, asking what he wanted to eat and complaining that Ethan was a real piece of work for finding Leo and not telling him. He said many other things, but Leo's mind was stuck on a single phrase: "Finding you." They were in the car on the way home that evening, parked in the driveway, before Leo realized Ethan hadn't changed into the suit he'd brought. He pointed this out, asking why. The driver had already gotten out, leaving them alone in the quiet vehicle. "I lied," Ethan said simply. "It was just an excuse to get you to the office." "Why?" Ethan looked at him, his gaze steady in the dim light. "Leo," he said, his voice serious. "What I said in the cafeteria. I meant it." "What?" "That I'm pursuing you. That was the truth." The words felt like 1,000 tiny explosions going off in his chest. Ethan continued, his voice low. "You won't admit you were the one who kissed me that night. Maybe it's because you don't like me anymore, or maybe for some other reason. It doesn't matter. From now on, I'll be the one to pursue you. All I ask is that you don't deny me even that chance." A heavy silence filled the car. In college, Ethan had been a campus legend. His name was a constant on the school's social media pages and honor rolls. He was brilliant, handsome, and carried himself with a quiet grace. Though he was reserved and spoke little, the line of people wanting to confess their feelings for him could have stretched from the campus gates to downtown. Leo had never imagined that this man would one day say such things to him, especially not now, when he was, for all intents and purposes, a cripple who couldn't even stand. He turned his face away, unable to speak. The end of the year arrived quickly. After a few quiet days at home together, Chris called on Christmas Eve, inviting Ethan out for drinks and telling him to bring Leo along. When Ethan hesitated, Chris insisted, arguing that it was unhealthy for Leo to be cooped up in the house all the time. After the call, Ethan tentatively asked Leo if he wanted to go out. Leo, who had a question for Chris, agreed. The bar was already full of people when they arrived. Aside from Chris, Leo didn't know anyone, but they were all welcoming. They were, he supposed, much like Ethan, polite and kind. After a while, one of the friends suggested a game of pool. Seeing Ethan's reluctance, Leo encouraged him to go, saying he'd be fine just having a snack. Once Ethan was gone, Leo waited a moment before wheeling himself over to Chris. He asked quietly if he had a minute. Chris, with his perpetually easygoing grin, seemed to have been expecting him. He confirmed he was free and asked what was on Leo's mind. Leo didn't beat around the bush. He asked why Chris had said what he did at the office, about knowing they would meet again, and about Ethan finding him. Chris didn't answer right away. He took a sip of his beer, then said that he couldn't reveal too much. It was a story Leo needed to hear from Ethan himself. But there was one thing he felt he had to share. For the last 3 years, Ethan had been searching for him. "Searching for me?" Leo was floored. "Why?" Chris just smiled again. "Like I said, you'll have to ask him that." He nodded toward the pool table. Leo followed his gaze. Ethan had taken off his jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his dress shirt, revealing his forearms. He was leaning over the table, focused on his shot. Then, as if sensing he was being watched, he looked up and met Leo's eyes. A slow, gentle smile spread across his face. Soon, it was time for Leo's trip to Germany. Ethan was supposed to accompany him, but after a week, urgent business matters forced him to return to the States. He had arranged for top-tier nursing care and made sure everything was perfectly set up. The doctors explained that the treatment would take 2 months, and if successful, rehabilitation would take another 2. Ethan called or video chatted every day. At first, Leo told him he didn't have to, but Ethan insisted that he couldn't be a lazy suitor. Leo had no reply to that, so he let it be. But Ethan's schedule was demanding, and often their calls were brief exchanges before he had to rush back to work. One afternoon, as Leo was resting after a treatment session, his phone rang. It was Ethan. Leo was surprised. It was the middle of the night in the U. He answered, asking what was wrong. For a long moment, there was only silence on the other end, punctuated by some faint rustling sounds. Thinking Ethan had dialed by accident in his sleep, Leo was about to hang up when his voice came through, raw and strained. "Leo, it hurts." The voice was deep and hoarse. "What's wrong?" Leo asked urgently. Another stretch of silence, then a ragged, labored breath that sounded unmistakably like a moan of pleasure. Leo froze, wondering if he should hang up. "I was drugged," Ethan managed to say. A knot of anxiety tightened in Leo's stomach. Forgetting his embarrassment, he demanded to know what happened. Ethan didn't elaborate, only saying that he had already seen a doctor, but the feeling was unbearable. His voice was so raspy he could barely speak. "What can I do?" Leo asked. Ethan paused. "Leo? Yes. Can I think about you?" Leo understood. After a second's hesitation, he whispered yes. He stayed on the phone with Ethan for 2 hours that night. A week later, Ethan was back in Germany. When he walked into the room, they sat in silence for 5 minutes. He sat by the bed peeling an apple for Leo, who pretended to flip through a book. "Here," Ethan said, holding out a slice. As Leo reached for it, Ethan caught his hand and pulled him into a fierce embrace. "Leo," he rasped, his voice sounding just as it had on the phone, though the drug should have been long gone from his system. "I don't care why you won't admit it. I'm willing to wait. And I don't care if your legs get better or not. None of it matters to me." He punctuated his words with a restrained, feather-light kiss behind Leo's ear. Ethan left again, and the treatment entered its most grueling phase. The hours spent in the therapy room felt like being flayed alive, and the pain that followed was a slow, agonizing crawl of ants under his skin. He often thrashed in bed, overwhelmed by the discomfort. One night, delirious with a tormenting itch, he broke down and called Ethan. The moment he heard his voice, a sob escaped his lips. "Ethan," he choked out, using his first name for the first time. The pain was making him lose his grip. "My dad. He bullied me." He didn't know why he said it, but in that moment of soul-crushing agony, his mind flew back to the accident a year ago. If his father hadn't delayed getting him to the hospital to appease his stepmother, maybe he wouldn't have spent a year in a wheelchair. Maybe he wouldn't be enduring this torture now. He thought of how, after his mother died, he had become an outsider in his own home. "I'll beat him up for you," Ethan said from the other side of the world, his voice a soothing balm. "I'll make him pay." But his words only made Leo feel worse. His life had been a landscape of gray since his mother's passing, and the accident had plunged it into near-total darkness. Ethan's reappearance hadn't been a joyful surprise. It had only brought with it a tidal wave of bitterness, insecurity, and doubt. Still, A desperate sliver of hope made him ask the question that had been buried in his heart. "You really don't care that I'm a cripple?" "Of course I don't," Ethan answered without a hint of hesitation. "Leo, it makes no difference to me what you are now compared to before." "Ethan, Chris said you were looking for me. But 3 years ago, you barely knew me. Why would you look for me? Just because I kissed you?" The line was quiet for a moment. Then, Ethan's voice came through, laced with a sort of weary exasperation. "Why do you think I didn't know you? Leo, if you hadn't disrupted my plans that night by kissing me, I was going to find you." "Find me for what?" "To ask you," he said, his voice closer now, as if he were speaking directly into the receiver, "if you would be with me." Leo listened, stunned. The world seemed to fall away, leaving only a ringing silence in his ears. "Get some sleep," Ethan said softly. "When you wake up, I'll tell you everything." He didn't refuse, nor did he press for more. In that moment, the pain seemed to vanish, replaced by an overwhelming wave of exhaustion. The next day, the hours of therapy passed in a haze as he wondered what Ethan would tell him. For the first time, the session didn't feel unbearable. When the nurse wheeled him back to his room and opened the door, Ethan was sitting inside. "How are you here?" Leo asked, shocked. Ethan came forward and took his hand. "I told you I'd be here to tell you when you woke up." He helped Leo into bed and then, as he held him, he told him a long story. A story about a man in college who had secretly loved someone. Someone brilliant but quiet, who always seemed to be alone. He spoke for a long time, describing in detail how he had fallen for that person. As dusk settled outside, his voice filled with regret. "I regret it so much," he said. "I thought if I got everything in my life perfectly arranged before confessing to you, it would prove how serious I was. But when you kissed me, I realized you liked me too. And then when I couldn't find you anywhere, I understood that none of those plans mattered." Leo listened, dumbfounded. The words flowed into his ears but seemed unable to penetrate his heart. They were too beautiful to be real. In his 4 years of loving Ethan, he had never allowed himself to dream. Even in his darkest moments after the accident, he had only allowed himself to subsist on old memories, never a shred of hope for the future. And now, this man was telling him he had loved him all along. He looked up at him. I never imagined this." Ethan stroked his forehead. "Every word is true. That's why I was so hurt when you wouldn't acknowledge me. I thought you didn't like me anymore. It wasn't that I didn't like you," Leo whispered, his head bowed. "I didn't dare." He gestured helplessly at his legs. "How could I admit it, looking like this? I'm useless." Before he could say more, Ethan's hand cupped his chin, tilting his face up. A kiss, urgent and searing and almost frantic, pressed against his lips. He pulled back slightly, their mouths still touching. "Leo, I don't care. Whether you can be cured or not, I don't care." He knew Ethan wasn't lying. But lying there, his legs still unresponsive, he felt like a wounded deer dragging itself across a barren wasteland, capable of nothing but self-pity. Seeing his silence, Ethan took a deep breath, then slid down under the covers. "No," Leo gasped, trying to stop him. But Ethan was as resolute as he had been on their first day together, giving him no room to resist. A kiss landed softly on one of the scars on his leg, then slowly, reverently, began to travel upward, leaving a trail of love on every inch of his skin. Leo's fingers dug into Ethan's arms as his defenses crumbled. Then Ethan moved back up, gathering him into his arms and stroking his hair. "Leo," he whispered, "as long as you're willing, that's all that matters." Ethan stayed in Germany for 2 weeks, the most critical and difficult period of the treatment. Whether he would walk again hinged on those 15 days. Leo was frequently overwhelmed by anxiety and fear, but having Ethan there made it bearable. 2 weeks later, for the first time in over a year, he slowly, unsteadily pulled himself to a standing position. He could only hold it for a second before his legs gave out, but it was enough. That day, he held onto Ethan and, for the first time, cried in front of him. What followed was a rehabilitation process that was less painful but required immense perseverance. He rejected Ethan's offer to accompany him via video chat, knowing the time difference and Ethan's workload would make it an exhausting ordeal. Over the next 2 months, he watched from his window as Berlin burst into bloom. He flew home on a day he knew Ethan wasn't expecting him. He had planned to go to his father's house first to collect his things. As he walked through the front door, he found his father and Owen sitting in the living room. They weren't surprised to see him walking, likely having heard from Ethan. But as he started up the stairs, Owen couldn't resist a snide comment. "Well, look at you. Guess you got lucky." Leo ignored him and kept walking. His indifference seemed to infuriate Owen. "You think Ethan Sinclair is some kind of saint? If his driver hadn't shown up that night, I would be the one living in his house right now." Leo's foot froze on the step. "What did you say?" "I said I almost had him that night. So don't you go thinking he's some good guy." Before Owen could finish, Leo's fist connected with his jaw. So that was it. He had sometimes wondered how someone as guarded as Ethan could have been drugged. It was because the attempt came from someone related to him, someone he hadn't perceived as a threat. "How dare you hit your brother?" His father roared, instantly livid. He had always been blind to the torment Leo endured from his step-siblings, deaf to the neglect from his stepmother. But one punch thrown by Leo, and he erupted in fury. "Don't you even think about laying a hand on him," Leo said, his voice dangerously low as he glared at Owen. For years, he had loved Ethan with every fiber of his being, and he would not tolerate someone using such despicable means against him. Then he turned to his father. "And don't you raise your voice at me. The only reason your business is still afloat is because of Ethan's goodwill. You should be far more concerned with whether I can, and will, keep him happy. Because if one day I decide I'm not willing anymore, I highly doubt he'll be interested in any of your other children." His father's face turned a mottled shade of red, but he was rendered speechless. It was late when Leo arrived back at Ethan's house. The lights were off. He showered quietly downstairs, then crept into the bedroom. In the faint moonlight filtering through the window, he slipped out of his clothes, lifted the covers, and slid into bed. Ethan started, his body tensing reflexively. But when his eyes focused on Leo's face in the dark, he froze. In that moment of stunned silence, Leo rolled over and propped himself up over Ethan's body. "Ethan," he whispered. "Do you want to sleep with me?" The man beneath him drew a sharp, ragged breath. He shifted, an involuntary telling movement. A look of embarrassment flashed across his face, but Leo found it endearing. He leaned in close, his lips brushing Ethan's ear as he murmured 3 words. In an instant, he was flipped onto his back, Ethan's body pressing down on his. The early summer breeze was cool against his skin. "I love you so much," he cried, the words he had held back for so long finally tumbling out, over and over again. Leo, who had studied design, returned to his former mentor's studio a month after coming home. It was close to Ethan's office, and at noon, Ethan would send his driver to pick him up for lunch in his office, followed by a short nap together in the adjoining rest lounge. That fall, Ethan took him home to meet his family. Though Ethan had assured him he had smoothed everything over, Leo was still taken aback by how warmly he was received. For someone of Ethan's background, He could only imagine the effort it had taken to persuade his family, and the care he must have taken to ensure they treated Leo not as an invalid or an inconvenience, but as a beloved son-in-law. That night, while Ethan was in the shower, Leo idly browsed the books on his shelf. Tucked inside one of them was a photograph. He pulled it out. It was a picture of him from his sophomore year, sketching in the library. "That was the day I knew for sure I was in love with you." Ethan had come up behind him, wrapping his arms around his waist and resting his chin on his shoulder. "I was thinking, I hope he likes me too." They all hurried past me. Leo murmured, remembering that day, remembering his siblings. "They all looked at me with such disgust. They just thought I was in the way." He paused, then added quietly, "And you have no idea, back then in the library, I knew you were sitting behind me. I was so nervous I could barely breathe." Ethan chuckled, a low, warm sound. He held Leo tighter, a sigh of deep contentment escaping him. Leo understood. Their path had been winding and arduous, but the past was prologue. They had wasted 6 years, but they still had 60 more to love each other.